Okay, this is Daf Lamed Zayin, Eis Beis. We're continuing on by analyzing the opening psukim of the Parsha Seitzei and explaining their meaning to us at a personal level. So the pasuk says, "Shavisa Shivya, you'll take captives." What does this mean? So from the expression of the nefesh through what we contemplate, voluntarily think about, speak, and do. If it becomes in matters of nonsense, that is, we allow our neshama to be scattered for ridiculousness, that is, that we utilize our koiches and we spread them out for thoughts and words and deeds of foolishness, mili de dieta, like we know regarding dreams and even the experience of kafakela, that this is the product of the remnant of any proper thought, because all of our mishagas remains within our head, and it comes out at some point. And these manifest themselves in all of our levushim, and they need to be gathered. Like it says, from there you will gather. That is, we gather them by uprooting our interest in them, and through the verbal recitation of vidoy, which is the letters that have fallen from their proper use into this improper use. And through the statements of Ashamnu Bagadnu, we elevate these letters, and therefore it's not only that we have to uproot the desire for these matters, we also have to verbally acknowledge them. And even more so, we know that from every sin, Pirkei Avos tells us, we create a prosecutor, a kateger. And it also has a nefesh and a guf. The nefesh comes from the taiva and the passion for these matters that we desire, and the guf is the actual physical activity or speech and so on. And therefore, in order to eradicate the sin properly, we have to address both the uprooting of the desire for it, that has to be discarded, and the verbal confession, which allows us to erase the behavior. And this elevation is to the lamed of tselem. We're talking about the tselem elokim, the word tselem, tzadik lamed mem, which is a reference to the makifim. It's this sort of ambiguous cultural characteristic that has a tendency to blind us. And therefore, it becomes seized both in the pneumius to the makif and in the backside of the makif, and we can't pull away from it, and it blinds our eyes. And this is what the pasuk tells us, that when we go out to war, we have to be above our enemies. That is, we have to get to a level where our enemy has no challenge to us. And this is the idea of elevating ourselves and scattering out those remnants of our thought, speech, and action, which are garments, in order to reach the atzmis, that is the tzaddik of tzelem, which is the Chabad, again, the chagas nihi, the 9 spheres, not including malchus, which is legislative and expressive, completely developed. There has to be an even greater level of tshuva, as we know that there are a variety and stages within the concept of tshuva. And this is achieved through drawing down the lamed of tzelem, which is the quality of mazel, that which trickles down. That begins with the mazel through Torah and mitzvahs, mitzvahs being the keser and Torah the chachma. Like the pasuk says, Araisa comes from chachma, Torah comes from chachma. And like Koheles writes, that the person's wisdom radiates his face. And like we ask Hashem that he should radiate his face to us, that it should be a revelation of Pnimius Halev. And this is what we say in Tillim, L'cha Amar Libi, to you I say in my heart, Bak Shufanai, you seek my face, as Panecha Hashem Avakesh, the face of God I seek. And this is through, again, going back to the Parsha, he takes this captive woman as a wife. This is the tzaddik of tzelem, which is called the isha, relative to Torah. The Torah is sometimes referred to as the chasen, b'yom chasen nasoy, the day of the marriage, that's Matan Torah. And sometimes Torah is called the kala. Like we say, not only that is the Torah an inheritance, Russia, it's also the betrothed, murasa. And again, that is relative to the mem, or this is relevant to the mem of tzelem. We're now on Daf Amid Beis of Lamed Zayin. And this requires understanding that it says in the Zohar that everything is linked to our mazel. Even a Sefer Torah that's in its heichel has a mazel, which suggests that Torah also has this level of makif, this mazel, this level of mem, that Torah itself is chachma. And in Parshas Baloischa, it talks about a neshama of a neshama. And similarly, we can understand in the Medrash and Shir Hashirim, where it says if a person will give all the wealth of his home for his love, the Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Chia bar Abba that he sold that which was given to him during the 6 days that Hashem made. But Torah was given to us after 40 days, because it says they were with, Moshe was up on Har Sinai for 40 days. And the idea of 40 days is also the quality of Chabad, which is the mem, as we mentioned before, of Tzelem. So this requires a question that Torah is called Murasa, our betrothed, relative to the mem of the neshama. So the Alter Rebbe suggests an answer that the Torah itself has the quality of mem, that is, it's the source of Torah from whence it is given. And Torah itself is Chachma. Like we know that the Torah is the Chachma of Hashem. And this is why we have to make a bracha before we learn Torah, because this is the mechanism through which we draw Torah down into our world. The Parsha then continues, and it says that you should shave her hair. The shaving of hair suggests the moisri hamoichin, the remnants, the sediment of intellect, not primary intellect. Now, within the levels of Kedusha, we have the sediment of moichin. This is a high level of Kedusha, the Gimnus Arachamim, which are drawn down through the hairs, which is not the case by the Leviim, who had to be shaved. And this is similar to the example that we said, that even the simple chatter of a scholar requires study, but that's only of a scholar. Whereas other ordinary people, that's just nonsense. Because a scholar, even he is the expanded moichin, and therefore even his simple chatter, which is the sediment of moichin, is still something that contains virtue and holiness. And this is also what the pasuk means, that it says that it does not give forth its fruit. Even the leaves, which are not the ikar of the peri, of the fruit. Nevertheless, for the great chacham, even his simple chatter contains chachma, which is not the case with the ordinary person. And that's why we say that a simpleton should not eat meat, because meat is an unnecessary luxury, and it will drag a person down into taiva. In contrast, a tzaddik eats only to satisfy his soul. So too with clothing. By the Kohen Gadol, it says we have to make him beautiful clothing, because the Kohen Gadol, which is the level of Chachma, again, the anagram of Kayachma, total bittul, and therefore kavod is given to the Chachamim. However, the ordinary person, it's just taiva and kavod, and it drives him out of this world. Similarly, the Baal Tshuva has to undergo self-deprivation, because Tshuva becomes offense, so he should not fall back into his old ways. Whereas somebody who's never sinned, he could say that I would do it, but Hashem prohibits me. And this is indicated in the shaving of the hair, that is, that we have to remove all unnecessary extraneous indulgences. Then the pasuk says, should let her nails grow. That is a reference to the sediment of midos, that chesed is the right hand, and then you can have a right hand, you can have the fingernails, and unkempt fingernails are like Avram, who was chesed, and yet he had a distorted form of chesed in Yishmael that resulted in lust as a sediment of his midah. And then when we said you have to shave the hair, that is the moisriya moichin, the Indian of inappropriate investiture of wisdom, of chachma in worldly matters, like it says that lo l'chachamim lechem, the wise don't have bread. That even though it says Hashem will bless you in all that you do, that bracha is in all that you do, which is the keli and the reason why God gives to a person what has been allotted to him in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for his parnasa. Whereas if he just sits at home and does nothing, he doesn't have anything, nothing is given to him. Because in this world, that's the way things are brought to us via our behavior, even though it's enclosed within our work, we don't see the miraculous side. Nevertheless, this itself is the blessing of Hashem in all that we do. But a person has to do. We're now on Amud Gimel. The bracha is set up that it manifests itself through our behavior. However, if we are inappropriately over-invested in our chachma, now we have moisri moichin, regarding which it says, the scholars, the wise, leila chachamim lechem. Because here a person illustrates that he thinks that through over-investiture of behavior of his work, he's going to bring about his parnasa, rather than seeing his work only as the keli through which Hashem will bring him his parnasa. It's comparable to one who sews a garment, but it's bigger than the person who's wearing it. If it's the right size, then it fits and it looks good. But if it's too long, then not only is it not good, but it causes the person to stumble and trip over it. And this that our sages say, what should a person do in order that he should be wealthy? He should do a lot of work, which would seem to suggest that there is a bias towards, quote, overworking. But this is like it says, that when a person asks rachamim from the one who provides wealth, certainly he has to make a keli that is appropriate for this bracha. And then when it says yarba b'schaira, that he should work a lot, it does not mean that he should overinvest his intellect into his work, because again, lo l'chachamim lechem. And anybody who is not desirous of being wealthy, he's just satisfied with basic subsistence, or even if he wants to, but he doesn't ask Rahmanis for it. If he will work extra hard, it's like, again, making a garment that's too long for him. What should he do? He should ask for a Rahmanis and not be satisfied or not be just sated by overworking. Like it says in the Gemara, that that one without the other is not going to work. That is, for the reason we said before, that the gift of Parnasa comes through work, through the garment of doing it. But that's not the source. The source is Hashem himself. And this is what is indicated by shaving of the head, which is removing extraneous mental acuity in our work. But this is comparable to, again, the hair that draws out from the brain. And that's why we say that a woman's hair is considered her nakedness, which is, by Torah, it says that we should coif our hair, because Torah, which is rooted in Chachma and Keser, so therefore everything that comes from it, even its hairs, are worthy of study and nurturing and sanctity, which is not the case with something of a lesser stature. And then the pasuk says that she should remove her captive garments. The garments is the concept of makif. And there's a makif both in the positive and the negative, because zelu mazeh. Because, like we say, that there is no shadow of a shadow in klipa, but a shadow there is. That is, like we explained before, that in Kedusha, there are two makifim, the lamed and the mem of tzelem. And that's the makif and the makif of the makif. These are the levels of chaya and yichida. There are two types of makifim. They're not tailored to our human behavior, yet they have a cultural impact, or a amorphous impact, an intangible impact. But klipa does not have a shadow of a shadow. That is, it doesn't have a makif of a makif. And this is what the pasuk means, that it says that it's about the yichida, that there is no comparable in klipa. Klipa doesn't have an answer for yichida. But the single shadow, that is one makif, it does have. There is an unseen influence even on klipa, and that's the lamed. Like we say, that one sin will cause another sin. It creates a momentum. Again, it's intangible. And the idea that if a person will sully himself, he'll become very sullied. Everything starts off small and then it snowballs, which he doesn't even sense within himself, that it is brought to him from this makif of klipa. And this is what it means, that she should remove her captive clothing. She has to remove this makif of klipa in order that the makif of kedusha, the level of lamed, should start to penetrate. Then it says she should dwell in his house. That means she becomes rooted there, b'kvius, that it becomes embedded within us, that it will never be lost. Now I'm a dalit. And then it says you should take her into the house and she should dwell in the house. That these two levels of makif are both called the garment and the house. That the garment is the close makif and the house is the more distant makif. And this is what it means, that he will see her in her captivity, this beautiful woman, the opening of the Parsha, which is the idea of transforming the midos, the level of the tzaddik of tzelem, that this guardianship that he is brought into his house, that is the makif that is brought into his house, and the makif of the lamed, that is called the garment, because again, in zelu mazeh, what is this captive's garment? Has to be removed, this garment, that through this it will rest within him the garment of kedusha, but it still has to be settled within his house. And then the pasuk says she will cry out for her father, the level of the high tshuva. Like we know from the statement of the Arizal, that if a person does not cry in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, his neshama is not complete. And this doesn't come because of his depression, but like our sages say regarding Rabbi Akiva, that when he understood the depths of Torah and Shir Hashirim, his eyes poured forth with tears. This is the virtue that is mentioned in the time of Mashiach, that he'll come through crying, which is a lofty level, like a child crying out for compassion. And this is the level of Yom Kippur. And then he will come to her and he will be her husband. That is the level of Mesiras Nefesh, like when we fall down on our knees on Ne'ilah, which is the climax of our elevation, as is explained in other places.